Okay, we left off talking about Combray and Levance's. How else would you take a photo? Hashtag selfie ambivalence. So, if you wouldn't mind taking a look at your notes and kind of refreshing yourselves and coloring what we talked about last time out when it comes to you. Oh, I said look over your notes when you remember what we were talking about. Yeah. What else about selfies were we talking about?
Yeah, so our last big point, which was pretty cool, was you said that people don't need other people to police their bodies because they police their own bodies.
Yes.
That was pretty cool.
Well, thank you.
I don't know, that was pretty cool worthy, so I wrote it down. That's what I have.
Yeah, so we were looking at these contradictions. You guys remember that? And so we got through the first one, which is this control versus vulnerability, right? And we were picking up on some of the themes that run throughout the article, and one of which is essentially the work of Michel Foucault in talking about living in this sort of police society, right? This society that mirrors the invention of the prison, right? It's a different way of thinking about people. That what feels like individualism and control actually ends up becoming this site of us just policing ourselves. We live in a society where we become our own police, right? How do we see that in our day-to-day lives? How do we see ourselves policing ourselves? Internalizing other people's judgments.
When like a cop car drives by, what do you think we do that?
Oh yeah, so we were talking very much so about literally the police, right? I think I brought up the thing about like leaving empty cop cars because as long as we think there's a cop there, it's just as good, right? In what deeper ways are we policed? So like not just the police police us, right? We all, in some ways in Foucault's world, like we're all the police. We constantly police each other. It's sort of like and this is like the cheesiest thing for professors to bring up because it became like a cliche for a long time, but you guys have probably seen or have some awareness of the movie The Matrix. I realize you were like, what, like 6 when it came out or something? Right? Is that right? Okay, yeah. So it's like it's not cool anymore or anything like that. But like, you know, the characters within it, right? Like in that electronic world, anybody can suddenly turn into one of the agents that like track and control people. That's very similar to how Foucault's world works. So we're all kind of like take turns becoming these police for one another. Okay, so what sort of things do we police? How do we control ourselves?
The clothes we wear?
How so?
By, I guess, by the appearance, or smell, or occasion, you'll dress yourself accordingly.
So, yeah, what do you do when you look in the mirror and you look at your clothes? Am I the only person who does this every morning? Which is sort of strange too, because it's like I wear the same things like I have for like a year now. So like why I have to see it, I'm not really sure. But I look at it and what do I think? What do you think when you get dressed? But what does that mean? Because does it look good to me? Because like when I get dressed, I have this robe I like to wear in the morning. Like it's really nice. It's kind of like silky. I got it at a thrift store like 10 years ago, and I think it's awesome. It's got like a little like monograph that isn't for me. It's somebody else's initials. But you know, like I wear it. I feel.
Imagine wearing that and that person had it so. Imagine it's the person that the way you saw that. I own that before.
That would be really awkward. Luckily, I bought it like states over, so like. But anyways, like, I like it. I think I look cool when I look in the mirror. I'm like, that looks good. Like, long robe, that's very slimming, you know? Like, it looks great. But I would never show up and teach this class in my long, silky robe, would I? Why?
Not appropriate, based off of like societal standards.
But why isn't it appropriate? Okay, so let's say things that are appropriate, right? Like, what can you guys wear to class? What do you feel like you can wear to class?
T-shirts, sweats.
T-shirts and sweats, yeah. Yeah. Do you still look at yourself in the mirror and think about your t-shirts and sweats when you put them on? I see some people nodding yes. For those of you who nod yes, why? What do you do when you look in the mirror?
Well, for me personally, you know, I'm just like wearing like a t-shirt and my sweatpants. I like to make sure that it still like looks good. Even though I'm trying not to like look good. If that makes sense. Very just relaxed.
I love that. I want to look good. And I'm not trying to look good, right? That's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, because like, okay, and so what I'm trying to pull at is like, I look in the mirror and I think about what other people will see when they look at me wearing it, right? That's a very interesting orientation to your own body.
You know, like what I do is I want to make sure I don't look like I just woke up and rolled out of bed. And also want to look like, what are people going to think when they see my outfit? Or are they going to, oh, she just woke up, or like, you know, all these different things.
Yeah, and I, admittedly, and this is going to sound really vain, like I want to look like I rolled out of bed, but I don't want to actually look like I rolled out of bed. Does anybody else feel that way? Like you don't want to look like you're putting it together, because that just makes you seem too put together. That makes you seem like a tool. Like you want to like, but like all this sort of weird self-policing, right? Like this is not necessarily something that people always do. Right? Like there's always been rules about what you can and can't wear, right? And sometimes those used to be really stringent. Like if you belong to a certain class, you can wear lace, but you can't wear purple unless you belong to the class above that, right? Like very clear, like tiered system of what you wear. But people probably didn't look around, right? At least if Foucault's right, people probably didn't stand around, look in the mirror and be like, does that lace look good on me? Is that flattering? Are people going to think I'm trying too hard? Does that accentuate my arms? I don't know. Like nobody did that. There's to some degree nobody thought about their bodies there. They didn't police their own bodies, right? In the same way that people didn't think about health the same way. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one. Do people generally like think about their own health every time they pretty much consume or do anything?
Yeah.
Why is that, right? Like whether you do or not, like you consume, like, every Saturday I go down and I walk down and get a donut at the donut shop down here, which by the way, very good donuts. It's probably my favorite restaurant in town is the donuts. But anyways, like I like them, I eat them, but every time I take a bite of them, I do think about how many calories are in them. Right? I think about whether I should be eating it or whatever, right? We police our own bodies in a very rigid way. Where before people generally didn't do that as much. They might really think if they have like a real problem with something, think about what they consume. By and large, people didn't, right? Police themselves the same way. So that's kind of what we mean when we say that we police our own bodies, right? We increasingly become this sort of internalized, and this would be Foucault's word for it, internalized gaze. And that's G-A-Z-E. You probably saw that running throughout the text, right? And this is particularly true, even more so for certain groups of people. Like you may have noticed, like there's a large narrative, or there's a lot of times that it talks about women internalizing men's gaze, right? And that's actually more common than the other way around. So women become often more sensitive to the way that men look at them and think about their bodies in a very harsh way. Okay, so does that make sense? So that's kind of what the author's picking up on in this control vulnerability distinction, right? Like it feels like it's me as an individual going out. Actually, like when I'm feeling that moment of freedom is exactly the moment that I'm actually probably thinking about how other people are perceiving myself maybe. Okay. Not to belabor a point, but I'm just kind of curious, like, do people find themselves thinking about their practices surrounding, like, the pandemic that's happening in the same way, thinking about whether something will or will not get you sick and what is and is not okay? In like this weirdly paranoid fashion. Does other people feel that?
Yeah.
Okay. What's that? I thought I heard somebody say something different. I was just curious, right? Because like I find that like it's like you don't really know, right? But you're like eking out your own rules, and you could almost see that as like a continuation of that same sort of medicalized process, right? That's one of the ways that Foucault would read something like that. Okay. Let's talk about visibility. Versus invisibility. I think we should plunge forward doing quotes, because I like doing the quotes. I don't know about you guys. We may do that in future qualitative articles if the quotes are good. If the quotes are boring, then I just won't do it. Okay, does anybody, so we're picking up on page 514. This is the visibility, invisibility, ambivalence. You guys remember what ambivalence means? Yeah, ambivalence is the word that they're using for the contradiction. It's like a catchword right now. Like all the cool academics are using the word ambivalence right now. So let's go ahead and read F8. Can I get a volunteer to read it? What's that? Yeah, in slash.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
The transcripts presented a series of discursive.
Just from the quote.
Oh, the quote?
Yeah, just from the quote.
I do think something a lot though.
I do think. Yeah.
I do think something a lot, just like you. If I look at it, you know the lighting and the angle, the way you position yourself. We're social beings, so when you take a selfie and post it online, in a way, I feel like you're kind of, how do I say it? It's like, it's as if you don't want to be invisible. You kind of want to post it and be like, I'm here.
Okay. Anybody want to grab the one? Another respondent immediately responds right afterwards, and what does that person say? Anybody want to take that one?
No, I really like how you said that. You feel invisible if you're not on social media. That's how I feel. If I don't have presence on Facebook or Instagram because I don't update my Facebook a lot, I feel like I kind of start to feel invisible. If you don't have a social media presence, I kind of feel non-existent, which is weird. Because I have a lot of friends. It's weird because I don't actually like being on social media. I don't like sharing my life. I don't know. It's weird. I do feel invisible too.
First of all, I find it really fun that Canadian teenagers say FB rather than Facebook. But anyways, just an aside. On FB, is that a phrase? Like, I've never heard anyone say that. Is that like, that must just, you have? Okay. So it's not just a Canadian thing, I'm just out of the loop. Okay, so what's interesting about this quote? Why do you think our author includes this quote? Should we grab another invisibility quote before we start, maybe? Just one more. You want to do that? Who wants to read the next one? This is on page 515, 515.
If I don't change my profile picture after a while, I start to feel anxious. It's weird, but I start to feel like that picture has been there for so long. I have to change it after a few weeks because I look up at it and go, I'm not sure the same person who took that selfie. I get really anxious. Sometimes I end up closing my Facebook account because it starts to feel obsessive, where it's like I need a really good photo there. It doesn't make you feel that great. It just produces so much anxiety.
Okay, so what's interesting about this? And particularly, you can even just think about the phrase visibility and invisibility. What's the contradiction we're seeing in their claims? I wonder you guys are very good with silence.
I kind of feel like they're feeling judged for posting something, but at the same time they feel judged for not posting something.
Yeah, and this in some ways is the not posting something. So why do all three of these people express that they post something? They feel like, well, and it's weird because it's like posting makes them feel like they're visible, but if they don't post, they feel invisible. They feel like they don't exist. It's in some ways sort of a contradiction between existing. Where is the trash in this room? It's over here. It is this sort of like tension between existing and not existing. So a lot of the discussion of like particularly social media is tied up in this something called postmodernism. You guys have ever heard this word before? It's a general rule you should data dump everything everybody has probably said about it, because it's not really true. We'll probably round our way back to other discussions of postmodernism here. But the one in particular here is this idea that sort of like our fictional worlds have overtaken our actual experiences often, right? And I think you hear a lot of that surrounding stuff like Facebook, right? That people kind of feel like if they're not on it, then people won't be able to connect with them, won't be able to find them, won't be able to talk to them, right? Do you kind of see that? So there's a weird tension here, right? That like people, why do people post on Facebook? What's that? To be seen. And in fact, like, there's a weird like description to this because the algorithms actually are designed so that if you don't post regularly, you will stop appearing on other people's pages, right? So like, does anybody here use Facebook? Is there any people left who use Facebook?
I use it.
Some people. How often do you guys post?
I don't post anything. I post.
Do you ever post? Do you ever post?
Yeah, I know like share things.
Yeah. Yeah. How often do you do that? I'm not putting you on the spot.
No,
Yeah.
a few times a week.
Okay. Last time, so like I migrated off of it, but I found out if you just like cancel your account, then like people can still email you and it just goes nowhere. So I'm like, that's creepy. Like I don't want old friends trying to get in touch with me thinking they sent me an email and then think I'm like ghosting them or something, right? So like I keep it and I check it like every 6 months. But I don't think I post on, I think the last time I posted on Facebook was probably 2008. So like, if I was to post something by the algorithms of Facebook, it would appear on nobody's feeds because like nobody's had this constant contact with me, right? Anyway, so that produces sort of this feeling of anxiety of having to post all the time for people sometimes. That's kind of the point. Okay. Do you guys, okay, other things that we caught in these quotes. What other things do we see here?
They all have like a common feeling of like having to do it, like because having to be on social media because they feel like they have to, not because they choose to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like a common feeling of like
Yeah,
I
they,
want to do it, but I still do it anyways.
yeah. Yeah, nobody, all these people didn't want to do it, but they felt like they had ceased to exist. Even this person who specifically talks about how many friends they have. Did you call it that? Like real friends, not like not FB friends. I figured I'd try using it once. Okay, did you catch this F6 one? There's something really interesting. Now, on the surface, it doesn't seem quite like they're making the same comment, but did anybody catch this weird comment about why he posts so regularly, he or she posts so regularly?
Is it start to feel anxious? Like, they start to feel anxious when they don't post?
Yeah, all of them say that. There's something different about this one. There's a it's in the middle of the paragraph that helps.
They're not the same person, just that selfie.
Yeah, they feel like they have to post regularly because they're not the same person they were, like, the last time they posted. So, like, that would be quite literally like I posted 2 days ago, but I'm not the same person I was 2 days ago, so now I don't really have a presence on Facebook anymore, so I have to post another one. Isn't that weird? Like, so you think about it, like, it's literally like this sort of like, it's almost like slipping into non-existence. And the point is like this feeling of like constant activity online is what they're trying to claim is actually tied up with the sort of like, or helps to create this sort of fractured feeling of who you are. That like you are constantly changing and altering so quickly that you're not really the same person regularly. And that this comes up in several of the respondents' like posts. So like our identities are becoming so fractured that we kind of like don't have a sense of continuity. So in a weird way, like social media on the surface seems like it would have this sort of sense of continuity. Like you have this feed that's just literally like a history of everything you've ever done. But in reality, it often makes people feel quite the opposite. It makes people feel like they're not the same and they're constantly changing, which is kind of interesting. Okay, last one. This one's more, this is, I feel like the middle one's a little more boring. I like this one quite a bit. So, this one is the as if and part of the reason why I brought up this form of postmodernism and fractured identity stuff is usually an indication you're talking about postmodernism, but that's one of the reasons why it's using the word post here. There's a story, somebody says, about going out, trying to upset their boyfriend. Did anybody catch this in this section? You could breeze through it. Does anybody catch what happened?
In the article?
Yeah, in the article. What is the story that this woman's related? About her boyfriend and her use of selfies. Yeah, go ahead.
She wanted, like, I think to kind of get back at him.
Yeah.
So, like, and maybe he broke up with her, and she wanted to empower her, but it's a fake empowerment.
Yeah, so why is it a fake empowerment?
Because it's not going to last. Like, she's going to take these selfies, but then it's going to be like, I don't know, at the end of the day, like, she's still hurting, and it's not doing it for her. She's just kind of like,
She still cares what she thinks.
exactly.
Yeah, so there is definitely that. There's something even weirder about this story. What does she want her boyfriend to think?
That he lost it.
That he lost something, that she's like, one's the attractive thing, right? So like, what does she do before she takes the selfie? I heard a couple muffled attempts.
Like she like makes her but we're in line, like reinvent herself.
Yeah, so she like, basically tries to get herself as attractive as she can via like trying to say this in the most like neutral fashion ever, right? Like grooming techniques, I don't know. I try not to sound like misogynistic, right? Like, okay, and then what did she do from there? She goes to a club, orders a drink, takes a selfie so that he thinks she's out having fun, and then she goes home. And so she posts this selfie, wanting to look like she's like out living the life, having a lot of fun. But in reality, she just like ordered a drink, took a picture, set the drink down, and walked off and went home and changed into her pajamas or whatever, right?
Well, you know, when you keep reading, it says that she had fun when she felt empty and she was doing it.
Yeah, well, and she's describing this act of going and taking the selfie as fun, right? And this is something that the author tries to gather around selfies. Selfies are supposed to be fun. People talk about them as fun. But in a lot of ways they're not, right? And in a lot of ways they're actually absconding real experiences, right? And so like, she didn't actually have fun. She had the image of fun that she posted. So to make somebody else jealous, right? That's the story. Would you guys do something like that? Would you consider that fun? No, like that's kind of the irony. Like it's a really unfun thing to do. Like if you would have went out and had fun with your friends all night, like then that would have been fun. But she just created this weird image of it, right? And so it's a question of like, does the selfie kind of, is it fun or is it just sort of as if it was fun? Is it a weird postmodern variant of fun where the technological picture taking has replaced actual things? I read this article, like this was like a couple of years ago, about people taking pictures of food, right? And like people do this all the time. You go into a restaurant, people are always like, you know, and like they actually did a study. Like this is a psychology study, so it was actually like more like experimental, and it was like experimenting and found that people took pictures of their food. They actually enjoyed their food less than if they just ate it. But taking the picture actually created this false expectation in their mind that the food didn't live up to. Isn't it interesting? It's like in a weird way, like, and by the way, this is not a real thing, even though I'm using it as a metaphor. There used to be like this mythos that indigenous peoples thought that pictures stole your soul, which like no actual indigenous people thought this. It's just kind of like something white people made up to make them sound like savages. Anyways, but there's something actually kind of weirdly true about the myth, even though like those groups of people didn't believe that, right? That like, in a way, like taking pictures of things actually does sort of steal something from them, and that's actually kind of like the point, right? Is like, and you can think about like if people go on vacation, and has anybody? And I am not outing you if you're one of the people who actually do this, but has anybody ever gone on a trip with somebody who just takes way too many photos? It's infuriating, right? Because like you want to go do stuff.
I'm literally that person.
You are. I'm
I don't know.
sorry.
I don't know. It's like something if I feel like if I go into the photos and I lose the memory of it, because I'm going to take a lot of photos and I go into stuff.
Yeah. But what's weird about it is like at a certain point, like we're recording memories that we don't really have because we're just taking photos, right? Or like I went on vacation once with somebody who quite literally like had to go places because they wanted their photo there. And it's like, you know, like you're traveling, like enjoy life. Like I have like 12 pictures from my entire 3 months I spent in Europe. Like I never took any pictures. Only if I was like, that's really cool. I mean, for a picture, I'm gonna take a picture of that. But otherwise, like I never took one. I have no pictures of myself. Anyways, okay, who really wants to look at themselves in a picture? I don't really get this as an appeal. Sorry, now I'm just like free-versing and like admitting like, I hate looking at myself. Mainly because like I feel over like a sense of control out of doing it. But like, I hate looking at myself. I never take pictures of myself. But anyways, getting to the point, it's like that experience gets robbed from it. And that's actually kind of the feeling of this as if fun part of it. It's like we're being robbed of our actual experiences of each other. And what we think of as fun is actually this sort of like replacement of it. This sort of foil of it. Does it make sense? Okay, cool. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about today is something called ideology critique. So the baseline assumption of ideology critique, hope you get the copy. The baseline idea behind ideology critique is that most of the media we consume has hidden messages. And what I mean by that isn't like weird, like, oh, like, you know, I don't know, like the government instilled hidden messages in our stuff and it feeds things directly in our brain. Instead, it's that like our culture replicates itself through these series of messages that we don't really know we're taking in. Right? How you feel about that is going to be entirely dependent on how you feel about the society in which you live. Often, ideology critique will grow out of mostly Marxism. We will get into what Marxism is in a little bit later, but like it's kind of a scare word in regular life, but in academia it's just sort of like really common. Anyways, so like Marxist scholars often are the people who do ideology critique. So their baseline assumption is that there are major things wrong with our society, particularly in the way that people dominate over each other. I'm going to leave that pretty broad. We're going to talk about inequality much later. But the idea of ideology critique is that these hidden messages, like somewhat unpurposely embedded, right? Not purposely embedded by anyone within everything we consume, essentially makes it so that we do not change things, right? It replicates the society over time. So one of the big groups of scholars that do this is a group called the Frankfurt School. And so today I think I'm going to take a little bit and talk about the Frankfurt School. Just as a little bit of history behind this, the Frankfurt School were a bunch of scholars from Frankfurt, Germany originally, who then had to flee Germany in the 1940s to keep from being killed. Actually, one of the people we're going to talk about today was executed. But anyways, they, after coming here, they were really interested in what had happened in Germany to cause the rise of authoritarianism, and whether or not we could see something similar in the United States, right? What they found is there is something similar, but it's not quite the same, right? So it's not like quite literally like, when you think about like Nazi propaganda, right? Like it's very explicit, right? But there's something a lot more implicit within American society that also is a little authoritarian. And one of the comments is one of the, so in their ideological groups, or in any democracy really, there's often these latent forms of authoritarianism. That's the claim they want to make. And one of the places we see this is in the place of emotion in art. So, for modern times, emotion and art didn't necessarily, nobody really thought of these as things that go together. Do most people know where most art came from before modern times? Where would you see most art? So by modern, if you haven't caught on, I would say if you wanted to, like, in your mind, set a date, like 1600 is basically the start of the period. So anything after that is modern. So before the modern, right? Who produced art?
Would be religion, like religious art?
Yeah, most of it's produced for the church. So what was the art produced for? And there's a couple of things that it was produced for.
Wasn't it to help, like, the poor better understand the Bible stories, basically? That they can read?
Yeah, so part of it is in the past, one of the things that it was for is communicating. Right? If you couldn't read, you could communicate in pictures. Right? So people conveyed a lot of meaning inside of it, right? There's something else that you use art for in a church setting. What do you do in church? Well, let's start with that.
Right.
You go through, yeah, you essentially worship, right? If we're talking more anthropologically, they're going to use the term ritual. Don't take that as like, we often mean that in a negative way, connotation-wise. It's not how this author would mean it either. So, yeah.
I guess it would also kind of use art to establish a connection with you, whatever the sculpture or picture is.
Yeah. No, I think that's more like the idea of communicating. So like, you know, there's a saint. It is to draw a connection between the saint, like whatever specific thing you're trying to communicate about it, right? You know, it might be like, you know, in ancient art it might be like, or in older art it might be like something like, I don't know, the saint when they died, it was a martyr, right? And it would basically be a communication of that story. So there's this identification. I think it would fall under communicate. There's a ritual function of art. That's so 2 is the ritual function. It's being used, right, as a part of the worship. That's really what it means. So if you think about like, what's the difference between art, the music we often consume today, and something like a liturgical church service? Do you guys know what I mean by that, by the way? Liturgical church service? It's when you have steps that you go through. So it's like, you know, set prayers at set times, set pieces of music at set times. What's the difference between, yeah?
I don't know, I guess it's more of like an observation, but one is definitely more ritualistic.
Yeah, one's more ritualistic. How else is it different? Think about going to a rock concert versus going to a church service. How is that different? What do you do at a rock concert? Or any music concert? It can be a classical concert. It doesn't have to be rock and roll. What do you do at a concert? Yeah, you sit and listen, right? What do you do at church? You participate, right? You're an active participant in what's happening. So Walter Benjamin, one of the members of the Frankfurt School, spelt Benjamin, pronounced Benjamin. He's actually the one who got executed, by the way. But anyways, he talks about like that at some point we changed from being actively participating in art that was mostly meant to communicate to instead being passive participants in something meant solely to invoke emotion. That make sense? So Benjamin wants to claim that there's something weirdly authoritarian to art today. As in like, somebody puts something before you to make you feel something. You feel the thing that they wanted you to feel. And so you basically get sort of like interpolated, brought into the art, right? And so there's this weird thing. So art becomes this consumption of feeling and this manipulation of you, as opposed to it becoming something that you're actively participating in, thinking about, and growing into. Another way to put it is Benjamin used to say that before modernity, art consumed you. Now you consume art. Right? So he wants to basically claim that we've made this transition. And I think another author in the same school is Adorno. He talks a lot about music, partially because he used to be a composer before he was a social theorist. And so Adorno talks about. Do you guys know which piece of music Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is? Does anybody know what that was written for? It was during the period where there was a lot of democratic revolutions, and it's called the Hymn to the Brotherhood of All Man, right? So it's like this democratic sentiment, right? That was set to music to basically like try to convince people to go out and fight in democratic revolutions in Europe. Right? That's kind of the point behind that song. That also becomes the official theme song of the Third Reich. Why is that, right? It's because what is behind that music, the music is about invoking a certain sentiment in its audience, which allows it to be sort of moved and changed. I think about this too a lot with punk music. I know I brought up punk music the other day in an article, right? But you get punk music was originally like anarchism, but there's also like skinhead punk. You know, and then there's hard edge, it's called hard edge punk. It's like religious punk, right? And they all sound the same, and everybody goes to these in mosh pits. Sorry. So it invokes the same emotion, but not with the same content. Same thing with like, if you think about like metal, like metal music that's metal, like it invokes very different feelings and it evokes the same feeling, often for very different intents in different communities, right? So the point that Adorno's making is that, much like Benjamin, is that there's this shift to art becoming ideological. Even if it has no words, art itself becomes this sort of ideological entrapment, this form of control. Right? Okay. Questions or thoughts on ideology? We can talk more about ideology if you want to. I had a video clip before. Not to say like you're missing out. Thank you for sticking around longer. I totally thought you guys were going to prefer like that. Have a good weekend. Be safe, be healthy. See you on Monday.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you.